federal government has planned to ban solar panel imports, and they say it's to drive local production. And this, they say, will accelerate Nigeria's clean energy transition, adding that the country has the capacity to meet its solar energy demands locally. In March, Nigeria's Rural Electrification Agency signed an agreement for a 1.2 gigawatt solar assembly plant, while announcing plans for another 1 gigawatt plant. Well, let's find out from players in the industry, in the energy industry, how they see this, if this is actually an opportunity or a threat to the domestic industry. We have James Fabola. He's the Chief Financial Officer of Energy right here in the studio. Hi, James. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Ini. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So what's your take on this plan to ban the import of solar panels?
Thank you. I think I can see how someone or a group of people can look at the data shared by MBS that we imported $150 million worth of panels in Q4 last year and think, is there an import substitution opportunity here, right? But that underscores the risk of doing just a top-down analysis and not matching it with a bottoms-up, because you then miss the nuances in the sector, right? Being an operator in our position, we've been excited about the trend over the last 18 to 24 months that have strengthened the value proposition for solar, driven by macro events such as the removal of fuel subsidy, diesel prices being at sustained high levels, and then band aid tariffs, right, despite the unreliability from the grid. So for us and key stakeholders, the key focus we should be obsessing about is driving solar adoption, which is also partly solving what has been a prevalent power problem in the country, instead of potential bottlenecks around trying to encourage the local production capacity of solar panels, which is not a bad idea in itself, but it would be putting the cart before the horse.
So when would you say it would be time to take this kind of a move? Because as you would have noted there, the government is saying, since there is demand now, why don't we then look inwards before the market becomes saturated with imported panels? What's wrong with now? When would be a better time if this is not a good time?
You raise a very valid question. There are three key things to consider. The first question is, what's the installed production capacity in the country today? As far as I know, there are two companies that have recently announced that they have 100 megawatts installed capacity, right? There is no public data around the capacity utilization, but my sense is today it's probably less than 10%. Right, so combined, we're looking at less than 20 megawatts worth of solar panels being produced. There's a report that came out last week that said last year, Nigeria injected an additional circa 70 megawatts of solar into the overall power generation, right? So we're saying today we have less than 10% capacity to meet demand that is growing, right? We're in a space where, like I said, macro events have strengthened value proposition for solar, and the demand for solar will only continue to increase. If we don't have the local capacity to meet it, then it defeats the purpose. The second thing is cost competitiveness, right? So China today is the predominant source for solar panels globally. Even developed countries like the US import solar panels from China, right? China has gone through a steep learning curve. Solar panel prices have reduced 90% over the last decade, driven by innovation and competition. The question is, can Nigeria compete, given all these factors, as well as factors such as productivity? And if the goal is to drive solar adoption, where one of the biggest challenges so far has been upfront costs, you want to reduce that as much as possible. If we're not able to compete globally, then we'd only be increasing the cost of the overall solar solution, and that would defeat the purpose. The third point is technical capabilities. Like I said, China paid expensive school fees. There were times where a few years ago, solar panels were catching fire, right? It's required a lot of innovation, a lot of R&D to get solar panels to the point now where they are safe, more efficient, and their useful lives are as far as 25%. I don't think we're there yet. If you check, a lot of the local producers, they're probably on the path to that, but they do not have the standards that some of the global guys have that would allow them compete and develop solar panels that are of the same quality. So when you think about these three factors, the time isn't now. If you ask me when, I'm not sure, mid to long term. But like I said when I started this conversation, the focus is let's drive solar adoptions. Let's get a lot more panels on the roof. Let's get energy to a point where it's reliable, given that it's fundamental to boosting the economy, creating jobs, and driving overall economic productivity.
So perhaps the government wants to create that necessity. They say necessity is the mother of invention. The China we all run to some years ago, if you saw a China product, in fact, when you said a product was China, then you meant that it was substandard. I mean, but they worked on that, and over time kept making some mistakes and improving on it. So perhaps that's what the government is building on, because when you also look at what's happening now, the new reality is a tariff-full world that's out there now. I'm sure you've heard of the announcement from President Donald Trump, and China is going to feel the pinch, and they might likely push it to whoever comes to them. So when you talk about cost, we might actually be facing higher costs out there because of the new order, the tariff, which is taking over the world at this time.
I mean, the tariff discussion is topical, right? As I was waiting to get in here, I saw that a 14% tariff was slapped on Nigeria, right? So it's top of mind for everyone. For us today, we're thinking about the China-Nigeria corridor, which some would argue the tariffs would only strengthen the relationships in Nigeria and China in the short term. But your question obviously is thinking broadly, holistically, right? What that could potentially look like, because again, nobody is able to predict what could happen in a couple of years. That being said, what some of us are advocating for is not do not put in any endeavor to local production, is there has to be a balance. Energy is in a position where we have supported local producers. We're already patronizing some of the local producers locally. But we know, without bad-mouthing them, some of their shortcomings, which they've also been candid about.
So can't it be worked on? Can't we, for instance, phase out and say, okay, this company is good with this part of the panel, so let's do this with this company, instead of just giving, opening the floor for international competition, which may not help us in the long term, because we still need to develop our domestic industry.
That is what we're doing. But if you think about it only from the standpoint of protectionist policies, protecting local producers, you're sort of insulating them from their development. They also need exposure, right? They need to see what sort of products are they competing against. They need to learn what the benefits are of procuring from China today versus theirs. And then gradually, they can meet those standards. It's not a 6-month journey. It's not a 12-month journey. It's a journey that will take time. It took China decades to get here. First of all, we need to learn how they got here, right? And then we start to implement that gradually, and then businesses like us will continue to support them. Because while obviously I started with the cost argument, there is a benefit to having local producers who can supply panels locally. There is the 3-month lag where everything from China takes 3 months. So I do see the benefit of increasing local capacity. But when you think about it from a broad standpoint, the overall net impact of renewable energy, if we slam the door shut to importation of solar panels today, it could have, at risk of sounding alarmist, catastrophic consequences on the renewable energy sector.
So what for you would be the ideal situation of finding a balance between sustaining the adoption at a cost-friendly level and still giving room for the locals to also develop their capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what is underpinned by that question is these are not mutually exclusive scenarios. You can incentivize local production without...
What kind of incentive?
Tax incentives, pioneer status, right? You can do that. Setting import waivers on some of their inputs, while still allowing for importation of solar panels to fulfill the overall demand. And then you can gradually start to have more stringent policies on imports while continuing to encourage local production. I think what a lot of operators are kicking against is the abrupt shutdown of importation, and then we wake up the next day and we're like, how do we meet the growing demand? Don't forget that we're also not functioning in isolation. We're part of a broader global solar ecosystem, right? There are players like the World Bank who have committed $750 million to a grant program to boost solar adoption. They will have a thing or two to say about potentially shutting the doors on solar importation and the impact on that on their overall economic, social, and environmental targets, which are very important.
Well, good enough. This is a proposal by the government, and we do hope that with conversations like this, governments perhaps will incorporate more with stakeholders like yourself and others and come to a better arrangement that will be good for the country. Thank you so much for your time. James Fabola, the Chief Financial Officer of ANUJ.
Thank you very much for having me.
Take care.